The hand went up in the middle of the road, and the jeep stopped. The military policeman was Corporal Henry Aldrich, 22 years old, from Springfield, Ohio. He had been standing traffic duty on a French road for 3 hours in November of 1944, and he had flagged down vehicles going too fast before. He stepped to the driver's side of the stopped jeep and looked in. He took a moment to process what he was looking at. Then he took another moment, because the first moment had not been sufficient. In the passenger seat of the jeep that he had just pulled over for exceeding the posted speed limit was General George S. Patton. The aide behind the wheel looked at Aldrich. Patton looked at Aldrich. Nobody said anything for a beat. Then Patton said, "Write the ticket." If you want more untold stories from World War II, hit that subscribe button. Let me back up a second, because before we get to what happened on that French road, you need to understand what Patton's relationship to speed limits actually looked like from behind the wheel of a jeep. Patton drove fast. This is not a contested historical point. His drivers drove fast, his convoys moved fast, and his own personal vehicle moved at a pace that was inconsistent with the posted limits on the roads that the Third Army was using. This was not ignorance. The Third Army had speed limits. The Army's traffic control regulations were real. They applied to all military vehicles. Patton knew what those regulations said and why they existed. The roads were being used simultaneously by supply convoys, infantry columns, artillery pieces, ambulances, and administrative vehicles. A vehicle going significantly faster than the posted limit on a road shared with trucks and troop carriers was not a tactical asset. It was a hazard. Some of those limits he had signed off on himself. He was doing approximately 50 miles per hour on a road posted at 35 when Aldrich stepped into his path. Now, here's the thing. The calculation that Henry Aldrich was running in the approximately 3 seconds between recognizing who was in the jeep and deciding what to do with that recognition was a calculation that most military policemen would have resolved the same way. Step back, wave the vehicle through, go back to your post, and process what just happened in the way that soldiers process things that fall outside the available categories. No reasonable person in 1944 expected a corporal in the military police to actually write a speeding ticket for the commanding general of the Third Army. Aldrich was a reasonable person. He was also a military policeman who took his job seriously, which is the quality that makes what happened next more than an anecdote about Patton. The aide started to say something. Patton said, "Write the ticket." He said it without edge, not an order delivered with theater, not a performance of integrity for the benefit of anyone watching, just the flat statement of a man who had been pulled over for speeding and knew what the appropriate response to being pulled over for speeding was. Write the ticket. That is what the situation produces. Aldrich reached for his book. He wrote the vehicle number. He wrote the date, the time, the location. He wrote the speed at which the vehicle had been observed. He wrote the posted limit. He tore the ticket from the book and held it out. Patton took it not with ceremony, not with a speech about the importance of rules. He took the ticket the way a person takes a ticket when they have received it from the appropriate authority for the appropriate offense without drama, with the implicit acknowledgement that the authority was correctly applied. The jeep drove on. Picture it. Henry Aldrich standing in the middle of a French road in November 1944, his book back in his pocket, watching the jeep that contained the Third Army's commanding general continue down the road he had been speeding on. The story reached his unit by evening. By the next morning it was a specific kind of story, the kind that told you something true about the army you were in. Here's what doesn't make it into the history books. What the story meant to the people who heard it, and why. The Third Army ran on a specific set of beliefs about command and standards that Patton had been building since August. The beliefs were not complicated. The standard applies to everyone. Rank adjusts the weight of responsibility, but not the weight of the rule. And the person who enforces the rule correctly is doing exactly what they should be doing, regardless of who they are enforcing it against. This was the same principle that had produced the stripe for the corporal who corrected the map, the handshake for the private at the checkpoint, the medal for the chaplain. The military policeman who flagged down a speeding vehicle and wrote the ticket was in the same company. He had done the job. The job was correct, and the commanding general's response to people who did the job correctly was consistent. The pattern was not accidental. And this is where it gets complicated, because the moment you locate it this way, the question of whether Patton was sincere or performing becomes genuinely unanswerable and genuinely worth asking. He was in the jeep. He was going 50 in a 35 zone. He had in fact been speeding. The speeding was real before the ticket was real. Whether Patton would have accepted the ticket if the violation had been marginal, if the Jeep had been at 36 in a 35 zone, is a question about the interior of the man that the exterior doesn't resolve. What is available is the behavior. A commanding general who accepted a speeding ticket from a corporal who flagged down his Jeep and gave him one. In the language of the standard he had been building, the corporal who wrote the ticket was right, and Patton's response to people who were right was consistent. Stay with me because there's one more detail that matters. The ticket existed. It was a physical document. It had a vehicle number and a speed and a date and a signature. What happened to it afterward is the question the accounts leave open. Some versions have Patton paying the fine personally. Some have it disappearing into administrative processing. What none of the versions have is Patton using his authority to make it go away, because doing that would have been the same as never having told Aldrich to write it. The acceptance of the ticket was only meaningful if the ticket remained real. A general who accepts a ticket with one hand and makes it vanish with the other has not demonstrated respect for the rule. He has demonstrated respect for the appearance of the rule, which is something considerably less useful as a foundation for the kind of army Patton was building. Think about that for a second. The whole value of the gesture depended on its consequences being real. Patton understood this. The ticket was accepted. The ticket was processed. The speeding was on the record. Henry Aldrich, 22 years old, Springfield, Ohio. He had been doing traffic duty on French roads for several weeks by November of 1944. He was doing what military policemen do, which is applying rules to situations that would prefer the rules did not apply to them. He was not looking for a story. He was looking at a speeding vehicle that needed to be stopped. He stopped it, he did his job, and the man in the passenger seat of the stopped vehicle told him to do the rest of his job, which he did. And then the vehicle drove away. The story reached his unit. He confirmed it when asked. He said Patton had been perfectly polite. He said Patton had not made a production of it. He said it was about 30 seconds from when he handed over the ticket to when the Jeep was moving again. Quick enough that the whole thing had a matter-of-fact quality. The quality of something handled without ceremony, because it required none. He went home to Springfield after the war and worked at the hardware supply company his uncle owned. And he told the story occasionally in the specific setting of veterans telling the stories they had, which is exactly where a story like this belongs. See, what most folks don't realize is that the speeding ticket story belongs to the same series as the checkpoint private, the map corporal, and the weather chaplain. They are all stories about the same thing. Patton's willingness to be on the receiving end of the standard he was asking everyone else to hold. The private who stopped his Jeep was right. The corporal who corrected his map was right. The chaplain who wrote the prayer was right, and the military policeman who flagged down a speeding vehicle was right. The commanding general who told each of them so was building something specific. The belief that the standard was real, not performatively real, actually real. Apply to the commanding general's Jeep real. Was Patton right to accept the ticket? To tell the military policeman to write it up rather than waving him off the way any aide in that Jeep could have done? Some would say the acceptance was theater. A general who speeds and then accepts the ticket has violated the rule and acknowledged the violation, which is not the same as following the rule. And the story about the ticket is ultimately a story about Patton accruing credit for doing the minimum while continuing to speed. Others would say exactly the opposite, that the minimum in this case was not nothing, that a commanding general who pulls over for a corporal and tells him to write the ticket is doing something that commanding generals did not routinely do, and that the value of the gesture is not diminished by the speeding that preceded it, that you can violate a rule and honor its enforcement simultaneously. That Patton did. Let us know in the comments below, and if you want more untold stories from World War II, make sure you subscribe.